I'm Joel, I'm an addict. I came to my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting on May 2nd, 2005. I've been here since then. I'm trying to think of a way to talk about who I was when I got here, and it's just there's so much there. This is where the cliches are best, because it talks about in our literature that when we get here, we're broken. We're spiritually bankrupt. That's like where I was at. I didn't necessarily use as hard as everybody else, but at the same time, my life was characterized by a lot of outrageous behaviors. In Who's an Addict, it says we were proud of our bizarre and antisocial behaviors. It's something to that effect. And that was me. It talks about in Who's an Addict, like the capacity to feel human was lost. That was me. It talks about in another look pamphlet, isolation might be the true nature of our condition, and that was me. And I think somewhere else in the literature will talk about isolation, like you can be isolated amongst other people, isolated in a room full of people, and that was me. So my first motivation to be here was I wanted to stop hurting. Like, frankly, I was in these relationships towards the end of my addiction, like a series of them, and they never worked out. Imagine that, because we were both always using, and we were both incredibly immature. We didn't know anything about anything, really, and these relationships would end, and I would withdraw from the relationship. It's just like going on a run. I would gather up my strength after these relationships, just go meet somebody else. So drugs and the addictive way I went about getting into relationships went hand in hand. Right before I got clean, I was in a relationship, and it ended, and I got laid off from my job. And it had nothing to do with me using drugs. It was just our contract was up. I knew that this was coming because we had been warned. Here is where the insanity was. I was in denial about it because he had money and he had other contracts, and I just kept hoping that he was going to give us a different job or something. That didn't happen. I was able to get unemployment, and so the relationship ended. I had the last day at this job, and I had actually gotten another job right where I was living. There was a business attached to my apartment, and the woman who was running the business offered me a job there, but I thought she was going to pay me under the table, and she actually was going to 1099 me, and I didn't want like my unemployment to be affected by that, so I ended up not showing up for that job. But anyway, it was a 1-2 punch, and I remember the insanity of feeling heartbroken over this relationship with somebody I had just met 2 months before, and I tried to use, and it just made me feel worse. And then the job was up, and I had managed to make my way well into my adulthood. I was 28 at the time, just coasting by the skin of my teeth. I didn't have the requisite social skills or emotional skills, stuff that I should have in order to weather these changes, like the transitions, like get another job. And I knew this. It wasn't going to be easy for me to go get another job. I got this job through my dad. It was paying really well. I had a college education, but I had never gotten an internship. I had never made the connections. I never put resumes out there. I was just coasting and living by the skin of my teeth like an overgrown adolescent or an overgrown child. And I had been a petty criminal and a drug dealer off and on for years. I had started getting high off my own supply, and it was just a mess. And I had a car payment that was 6 months behind, and I was dodging the repo people. But in an interior way, I just felt hopeless. I had built a life like a house of cards, and drugs were one of those cards. And when it came crumbling down, the real me was revealed, and the real me was lacking. I didn't have the means to make a life for myself. I didn't know how to make happiness. And I'm getting way ahead of the second step, but it's hard to not talk about being restored to sanity without talking about making a way in life without the use of drugs that is sustainable, that is meaningful, that works. One of my favorite passages in all of the literature is like, if it's spiritual, it's practical, it's spiritual. So like everything was lacking. I had no resource. I had no inner resources or outer resources to handle what would come down the pike on me. And I gave up. I threw my hands up. I was just like, I need help. A friend of mine had gotten clean, and he was worse than me and my other friends. We were always pointing at him and saying, he's a real addict. Like we do other drugs and we keep jobs. He's like getting left for dead in the middle of the street over drug deals, and then he comes back and he's not all there, and then he's doing more drugs. He's bad. Like, we're good. We have jobs, we have girlfriends, we have cars. We're not putting needles in our arm or pipes in our mouth, so we're like good. He is the fucked up one. Well, he got clean and he came back, and then it was like, well, wait a minute. And I remember he would come around even though I was using, and it was so funny because I remember being hostile towards him because what he represented was, maybe I was just as fucked up as him. Because look at him, like he did all worse things than me, and he used harder drugs, but here he was clean and I wasn't. he carried a message without using the word carrying or using the word message, because if he had used either of those words, I would have thought he was fucking nuts. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I would think he was in a cult. I ran into him about like 6, 7 months before I got clean, and another relationship had fallen apart, and I was all upset about it. And I'm fucking using in front of this guy, and I'm smoking weed, and I'm crying into the bong. And he gets up to leave because he can't be around that. And he's like, dude, if you need someone to talk to, call me tomorrow. The way he dealt with me, that was mind-blowing, because everybody else was running away from me. Even my good friends were like, Joel, come on, stop. You're a mess. They didn't want to be around me anymore. My manageability and all my idiosyncrasies and all my insanity was coming out, and they didn't want to be around it. And a lot of them were using, they'd rather use than deal with my shit, right? And so he was offering another way of life to me, and he was offering care. He was doing a 12-step on me. And I didn't know it at the time. And so when all that other stuff happened and I needed help, I called him. He had actually, it's so crazy to talk about because he's dead now. Like, he relapsed later and he died. When I called him that day, like, even though he carried the message to me, he was on the other side of the country because he was escaping $20,000 in gambling debt because he was clean, but he was still unmanageable. But he still answered the phone, and he still put me in contact with 2 people. One of them came and picked me up and took me to that first meeting. The other person became my sponsor. And so I just started going to meetings. And when I went to meetings, it was like that experience of feeling broken, experience of understanding on some level that what I had, what I had learned, who I was, wasn't enough to make a life for myself. And the drugs were just a symptom of that. I carried that sense of surrender. It's very interesting in the text, in the step working guide, it makes a distinction between resignation and surrender. There's a huge difference there, even though they can appear the same way and they can even feel the same way. Resignation would have been, my life's fucked up, let me dig deeper. Let me use harder drugs. Let me go meet somebody else who's even worse for me. Let me say, fuck a job. That would have been resignation. Surrender was, I'm broken and beaten, but I need help. And the second step comes in is like not knowing what that help is going to look like, having no frame of reference. If you think about it, it's so crazy what we offer here. I was going to say sell, but we're not selling anything. Of course we need a second step. We need hope, and we need to come to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity and keep coming back and like all the cliches, because on its face, if you've never been to meetings, it's like, how is a room full of strangers with these corny key tags and all this literature, how is that going to change me? Like 28 years old, 28 years of living, all the things that I did well, all the good traits I had, how is this going to help me? Of course it's a hard thing to buy into. But I was so beaten and broken, I was just like, okay, I'll try it. Like, how could it hurt? Once again, I don't want to say it's a sales pitch because we're not selling anything, but in some ways it's like a sales pitch. Like the sales pitch began at the very first meeting. And the second step began because each time I was offered something that we do here, like some piece of recovery, the hope was increased. So I had to surrender, and the surrender brought me to meetings and brought me to being open to new information. That was my part I played. And I didn't earn that. Only thing I did well was listen to it. Like, I'm fucked up, I'm broken, I need help. Follow that, okay? You're broken, go to the meeting. Okay, I just listened to that voice that said, well, go there. Like, I got nowhere else to go. I felt the message and heard the message, like little pieces. At my very first meeting, the guy who spoke said he was always a sprinter and life is like a distance run. He would always give up. He could do the first 50 yards, but then he would give up. And I was like, dude, that's me. And then somebody shared from the floor, it was like, you know, I'm not afraid to die. And everyone always tried to scare me with how if I keep using and keep living this lifestyle, I'm going to die. And he's like, I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid of living a life that has no meaning or purpose. Essentially, a guy from is living a life of despair. And everybody, all the well-meaning people that tried to intervene in my life and talk me out of using and be like, you're better than this. That's what they always came at me with was, you're going to die or go to jail. Those didn't seem like that they were much worse than how I was actually feeling underneath it all towards the end. So that wasn't an appeal to me. I was like, so what? Maybe that would be better. And he alluded to, he implied what he said, that he had found a sense of meaning and purpose through this process. I never heard anybody relate the fact that they had used drugs because they didn't know how to find meaning and purpose out of life. So that was like a second step moment. It was like, okay, something's going on here. I don't know what it is. So I keep going to meetings. And then the old me, which of course I'm going to bring to the table because we don't change overnight, would disqualify. Or the old me would come out, like my bizarre behaviors, the differences, like all that stuff would come out, but we have like an atmosphere of recovery here that is like built up to attend to that. So people weren't like, get out of here, you weirdo, or like choice 4-letter words while sharing that would offend everybody because I was fucking shot the fuck out. And people were like, but like afterwards, like some people come up to me, it's like, all right, we love you anyway, even though you're like a little shot the fuck out. And that's funny on its face, but without that, anywhere else I would have gone, it would have been like, maybe they wouldn't have been outrightly rude to me, maybe they wouldn't have asked me to leave, but they wouldn't have wanted me there. And that's a second step experience too, because that's a power greater than us to welcome people that get rejected everywhere else. That rebels against human nature to some extent, and we do it because we've been there. But that's not natural in the order of things or the way groups or places you can go in the world work. It's the opposite. They'll kick you out if you act that way anywhere else. Here, they're like, come on, come back. You know, like, we'll help you. Like, I didn't like what you said, but it's okay. It's so mind-blowing to imagine that my life actually literally teetered on the fact of whether I was going to be rejected or accepted in those moments. Literally. And the work that had been done through other people recovering and then trying to build something so we have a place to go, and we have a mechanism to recover, all that was being leveraged in those moments to help me. It's second step experience. There's a power greater than me that I couldn't see in that moment. I thought you guys all independently acted that way. Like, I didn't know you were referencing traditions and other people had taught you that way, and that often in meetings we're not acting the way that maybe we should, in theory. I didn't know all that. I just accept, like, all right, well, they're just cool people. And so the story of my recovery has been about having to stay in this posture of open-mindedness and hope without any evidence that things were actually going to work out. The greatest analogy for that is like when I started hearing this business about you can lose a desire to use. I was just like, no. Like, no. Maybe you can. But even that, I was like, are you seriously telling me you guys actually don't want to use anymore? I could buy that you're here and you're going to do it out of willpower and you're going to be supported by what we do here. But you're telling me deep down you don't still want it. I just thought it was bullshit. Like, it wasn't bullshit enough for me to walk away. But I was like, I call bullshit. There's no way. Well, you fast forward probably around 18 months, and I can't say the desire was completely removed because it comes back in different forms. There's times when I feel like this, it's almost like a phantom limb. It's like, it kind of reminds me of when I wanted to use, and I'm like, is that a desire to use? I'm not sure. It'll come out in other behaviors, so I'm not saying it's been totally removed. But to go from where it's like every waking moment, that's what I thought about doing. I thought about the next thing outside myself that was going to make me feel better. To not even really thinking about it. If I think about it, it's rare, like once every few months tops. That transition is insane. And it happened because I worked steps, and it happened because I changed my life, and it happened because I learned to be in service and fill my spirit with good things. And it happened because I learned social skills. I got better jobs. I had better relationships. Just by the sheer virtue of not doing drugs, my life improved. So choosing a life that is good versus a life that's fucked up from drugs, like, of course. But there's no way for me to understand how that was going to happen. But I still did the things that allowed it to happen, if that makes any sense. I still bought in without knowing what the product of my buy-in was going to be. I invested without seeing the portfolio, that this business was going to pay off, if that makes any sense. That this project was going to get off the ground. I bought in before that. I bought in on sheer first desperation, and then there's this transition where desperation and hope get transformed. And that's a miracle they talk about. Like, don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle, which is such a corny-ass cliche, but it's so true because there can be moments where some pain gets transformed into joy. And the chore of coming to like a church basement and listening to weird music and seeing the cheesy key tags and hearing the same readings, like suddenly that gets transformed into, dude, this is awesome. There are people here that understand me, and I love them, and I care about them, and they're there to support me. Like, I don't want to be anywhere else. And it's like, wait, how did it go from I don't want to be here to I don't want to be anywhere else? There's a pivot there. It starts to make sense. But to get to that place, to make that leap, it requires a second step. It's not like we just come in and have these salvation moments where just accept it like, oh, no, it hurts. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't make sense. Like me, I'll speak for myself, like I rebel every step of the way. And why shouldn't I? Of course I'm going to rebel because the way I know how to do things is built into me. The way that I interpret reality and the way I react to reality is a product of, at this point, 41 years. So, of course, 41 years versus what you're saying, Of course that's going to win most of the time. But the art of it is allowing what the other input is, whether it's in the form of a speaker or in the literature or in a relationship, therapeutic relationship of one addict helping another, allowing that in a way that it can transform me to the point where I can see things in a new way and I can take on a new way of living that I didn't previously think was going to work for me for whatever reason. Or I just didn't want to try. Probably just because I was scared. And I just think it's amazing how it's built that way. It's built with a gentleness that this addict needs. Don't get that twisted. It's not that it's gentle in the sense it's going to pat me on the ass and just let me do whatever I want, but the process itself, even though it holds me accountable, it does it in a way that's loving, that's understanding, that the process itself is built in a way that it understands. Most of the things I do don't serve me well, and I'm not aware of that. Most of the things I do are based on fear, but I don't think I'm afraid. It's not coming out that way. I'm like, I'm not fucking afraid. What are you saying is afraid? But I'm afraid. And the process is like, all right, you just need to be in a second step and wait and hold on. And this is the exact spirit that I approach the people that come into my life needing and wanting help. You know, there's that responsibility and there's that fine line where it's like, I've encountered people that keep using and keep using and keep using. And then I'm arguing with my other friends. I say, what do we do with this guy? The one guy, I'm sponsoring him. Then this guy's sponsoring him and nothing's working. And the one guy's like, well, he just needs to take responsibility for his life. And I'm on the phone with him, like, saying the same things to him. I'm like, why don't you love yourself? Learn to love yourself. That doesn't work. Because he, in this case, without breaking anonymity, how he's acting today is a product of 37 years of living that way. So once again, is it going to be the 37 years of the way that he constructs his reality? Is that going to win? Or is it going to be Joel quoting some fucking literature? Of course that's going to win most days. But it's a process of continuing to try to present him with, in a loving and caring way, a second step opportunity for him that he can buy into. And he's taken them many times, but then he went back. And of course, I haven't picked up drugs since May 2nd, 2005. I've picked up every other kind of behavior there is. Every single kind of behavior there is. I could have been hospitalized. So much risk and danger coming from the same place. It's an addictive place. It's self-centeredness. It's obsession. It's compulsion. It's resistance to change. It's impatience. It's all the defects of character that I struggle with and I'm going to go struggle with for the rest of my life. But I always would get back up and keep trying. As long as there's breath, there's hope. I just know that miracles do happen. And through the spiritual principles, I begin to understand the things that happen around me in ways that make more sense for me than the ways that the wider world. And I get it because they have different agendas and they have different needs. And they're not equipped to understand, unless maybe they go to a fucking Narcotics program, but they're not equipped and it's not their job to handle us. But they're just like, dude, the dude's a lost cause. We're the only ones who don't believe that. So we may be the only lifeline. Did I do enough? Having to bury people and thinking, did I do enough? Probably I did, because I showed up. And I continued to be open to the process that healing can happen and that life can improve and life can get better and that we can move away from the nightmare and the horror and the confusion and the madness. Active addiction in all its forms is a form of madness. It's a disconnection from reality. It's a lack of proportionality, like it's blowing things out of proportion, it's exaggerating things. And when somebody's in it, you can see it, but when they're in it, they can't. And that's a definition of insanity. So insanity, an opening has to be made, and love is the opening. And care is the opening. And showing up for other people is the opening. And experiencing recovery is the opening. And that's all second step experience. That's all I have to share. Thank you.